It's time again for another session of Enverus Subsurface Studio Pro Tips. My goal is to help users in ESS work smarter, not harder. Let's take a look at some functionality that's been in ESS for quite some time.
Raster log digitization. You're working a deal, fringe area, it doesn't have a lot of digital logs, but some raster logs. Budget is tight, so purchasing these logs isn't an option and you don't have time to send out to digitize them. Why don't you digitize them in Transform 6? This series, I will show you how to bring in the raster file and depth register them to set up the curves and define the tracks. And lastly, digitize the log, save that LES, and view and interpret in Transform 6. First, open the Raster Log Digitization module in Transform via the Geology dropdown. Then simply drag and drop the raster TIFF image into the Raster Log Digitization panel. Note, you will need to have the well location previously loaded to your project to link this raster. You can use this flashlight to search for the well. Once the raster is loaded and linked to the proper well, users will need to define the different sections for this raster log in Transform. So let's go ahead and start with the header. Right-click to define the header. You'll use this pink box to do that. Once defined, you can double-click to view that header, allowing a closer look to fill in additional information for the well, like the KB, and also like what kind of logs are contained in the file. We can add it in this little panel on the left. Remember that users can always edit a defined header as needed. You can use that purple pencil that's right next to the well header, or you can also double click on it and then right click to graphically edit. And always remember that you can double click to return to the full log to actually define more areas than just the header. So here, let's define this first log segment. Users are able to define multiple segments per log, and those segments can have different tracks depending on the logs in your raster. You'll go ahead and start in the upper left corner with the topmost MD of this log track. Notice that the green and blue grid is now showing on the log. And then when we get to the bottom of this log segment, we'll input the bottom depth MD. We're going to scroll back up the log and check that these grid lines match up. Possibly we need to fix where the scan log might have a bend, as some older paper logs might have, right? You can left click to drop additional anchor points, and you can adjust that depth grid as needed. I also have options at the top to snap the grid to the left, vertical, or right. Just keep scrolling up the log and just check for everything that's in the right spot. And the same as headers. Users can edit and update a log segment as they need to. And also be sure to note that you can update the vertical scale, and that's going to be in that left-hand panel. Once we're finished setting up, kind of depth registering our log track, and we got the grid all set up, we can actually save our projects thus far. Transform will save these files so you can finish digitizing this log when you have time. So we'll simply open the Raster Log Digitization module later and go search for that file that you have just recently saved. Let's continue with part 2 of Raster Log Digitization. After bringing in the raster log and completing the depth registration, the next step is to set up the curves, define our tracks, and digitize the logs. You'll remember we saved our progress from our last session, so let's go ahead and recall that file. Now we can set up the curves on this log segment. First, we'll set up the top and bottom scale blocks for each log segment. Note, users can have multiple segments in a log if necessary. I will use a left drag to set up those scale blocks. And then after I set up my scale box, remember I can double click to allow me to view any of these segments that I've set up. That will help me with the log scales as I set up each log curve to digitize. Default when a user adds a log segment is to have a left and combo track. Right-click allows to remove or add a different log track as needed for your raster. I'll set up this game array first. Here I'll select the game array and then put in the scale. I can also change the color as I would like to. I can also use wrap left or right to kind of help when I'm doing the digitization. Next, I'll add the SP, add that scale, and note the correct units. And then I'll keep moving on to these resistivity curves. Users have other property type options as needed, but there are many preloaded curves and templates to use to help you in this process. I like to add all the curves I plan to digitize at a time, but you can add one curve and digitize each as you like. It's dealer's choice. Also, users don't have to digitize 100% of the log on that depth track. Transform 6 will tell you what percentage of the log has been digitized based upon the depth range set in this log segment. Before we continue and define our mnemonics to digitize, I want to show a logarithmic scale log. Same grid setup as before, but with one additional button here. And it'll just let Transform know that this is going to be a logarithmic scale. Remember to save the file, and then you can recall and pick up later when you would like. Users can also come back to a saved file and add an additional log like this connectivity log to be digitized. Now that our curves and scales are all set up, we're ready to do the digitization. We will open our previously saved file and pick up where we left off. Remember, double-click any segment to view. That can allow you just to check that you've set everything up before you digitize. You can also engage the mouse bindings so you can understand the controls in this module by using Control-Shift-M. And a little dialog is going to show up in the lower right of the screen. So let's start off digitizing this log segment, the game array. I'll scroll to the top of that log and add the game array curve to the left track. Notice all the preloaded curves to help you out. Once added, you can see the range, scale, and units of the log, and I'll right-click to graphically edit or digitize this log. To help Transform recognize the game array curve from other parts of the raster image, I'll define the image color. I can start the digitization with a middle click, which will engage the auto tracker. Continue to work your way down the log, adding seed points along the way. There are additional tools in the upper right corner to help in digitization of your log. Users can hide or show the grid of the raster image as needed, and depending on the type of log curve being digitized, users can update the auto tracker's curve shape of search. I'll stick with what I have though, but I love options. Once I've completed this gamma ray log digitization, I'll go back up the log and actually start checking my work. Here is an example of how the off scale is helpful. I added one off scale to the right of the gamma ray curve, and that's why I have 2 duplicate panels instead of 1 in the digitization mode. There might be a few parts of my curve to tidy up as I work my way up the log, but that's way better than having to press every single and digitize every single point on my log, right? I can turn off the mouse bindings by clicking on the mouse bindings and pressing escape. And then once I'm satisfied with this log digitization, click Save. Users can always come back and edit that curve as well. Let's work on the next curve in this left track, this SP. I'll do the same thing as with the gamma ray. I'll add the curve to the left track with this curve template list. Define the log's image color on the raster image, graphically edit, and then I'll start to digitize. Users can update the drawing color if needed, and I'll change this one to red. For this SP curve, I actually don't think I need the off scales in the left and right, and I can remove them with these green and minus green buttons at the bottom left of the module. Since I've already digitized the gamma ray in this left track, I can select to force the auto tracker away from the previously digitized curves. This will help further constrain the auto picker for easier digitization. Just like the gamma ray, I will work my way down the log to digitize. Once at the bottom, I might decide to stop digitization here because I don't trust that information that's been collected below this depth. I can drop a label there to remind that I stopped there if needed. Users can also use the drop-down menus in the top right of the application to toggle between view and edit modes or toggle between log curves in the same track. Be sure to save your progress. Let's move to another segment and digitize this steep resistivity curve. I can view the scale block by double-clicking on that segment. I will set up the deep resistivity curve like the gamma ray and SP prior. The only difference is selecting the log scale. I'll finish up digitizing this log, and then I'll save my progress, just as I've done before. Maybe this is all the logs that I would like to digitize in this particular raster. Once the logs are completed, click Save Logs in the lower left of the module. Users have options. Who doesn't love options? Here you can see each segment, which log was contained, and the percent coverage of that log's digitization versus the depth track setup for the segment. Users have the option to save the LAS files to both the linked well in Transform and to a file folder location outside of Transform, and then you can access those LAS files whenever you'd like. Users can also select the desired logs to save. Once the LAS files are saved to a well, you can access those in the well card for that well. These logs will be just like any other LAS in your project. You can view the logs in the well card and in the single viewer, plus bring up the correlation view and pick tops. So you can see the logs there. They look just like all the other ones in the project, a gamma ray and a resistivity. And then I can go ahead and pick a top on them, just like any of the other logs. Lastly, users can open the saved workflow if they would like to digitize more log curves in that raster. Since there are options when saving the log curves, users can always save just those newly digitized logs as desired.
Give this a try in your ESS project. Thanks for spending some time with me today. Got questions? Want to learn more? Email me at robin.marchand@enverus.com or click here for more information about Enverus Subsurface Studio.